everyone, welcome back to another podcast episode. My name is John Venus, your host, and today a good friend, Seb Alex, has joined me for an amazing interview slash podcast. Seb is an animal liberation activist who's been doing amazing work for, the animals for many, many years. And I'm super excited to have him on this podcast today because it's been a while since I had an animal activist on the podcast. So it's really going to be super interesting to dive deep and learn from this man who's, battling it out every single day on social media, in person, and all that kind of stuff. So welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So Seb, let us know a little bit of your background for anyone who's listening who is not familiar with your work, what you do, how long you've been vegan, etc. Give us a little backstory.
Yeah. So I'm born and raised in Lebanon. I moved to Europe around 10 years ago. And then I was vegetarian for 8 years because I didn't know anything about veganism. And when I learned about veganism, I became vegan. And the year after, I started doing activism as well. So I've been vegan for 6 years now, activism for 5 years. I did most of my activism in the beginning on the streets, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then
in Barcelona, right?
In Barcelona, actually.
Awesome, yeah. For you guys listening, I'm in Barcelona right now, so that's cool.
Yeah,
cool
that's
story.
True.
I remember that we first got connected when you were living in Barcelona, and we're sending messages back and forth. Unfortunately, we never got to meet in person before, many years later. But yeah, it's a fun fact. Anyways, sorry about that.
It's all right. And we started doing street activism in Barcelona, and then the different types of activism, and eventually started by the way, I'm gonna apologize in advance. We're taking care of so many dogs here. We had 7 just a week ago. Right now we're down to 5 dogs. So if there's any barking out of nowhere, that's what's happening. So just recently I switched my activism more towards direct action events, civil disobedience, but also giving lectures in universities and schools about the importance of animal rights and why everyone should also start getting active. Not just going vegan, just get active and raise awareness about animal rights.
So you've done many different types of activism in the past, and maybe you can explain to the audience what those different methods of activism are and why you have now chosen to focus more on direct action.
Yeah. So the difference would be what I was doing earlier was street outreach. So talking to people on the street, raising awareness, very educational and everything. Direct action is more being on the front, let's say, of certain activism, like events or nights or whatever you want to call it. So if you go out there and enter a farm and rescue an animal, you're taking direct action to help the animals. So obviously, this doesn't mean that the other type of activism isn't important or valid. The only difference is that, for example, if you talk to people on the street and make them go vegan, you're being indirect with your activism because you're helping through the non-consumption of someone else. But when you enter a farm or a slaughterhouse directly yourself to save the animals or take footage of what's going on, then that would be considered direct action. And that also obviously includes civil disobedience, which means you are basically not respecting a certain law because the law is unethical. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I switched more to that as well is because if we look back at different type of justice movements in the past, whether it's against the slave trade industry, whether it's for women's rights, having the right to vote and everything, we realize there's always a pattern, even with the civil rights movement in the States. And that pattern is that once more people start taking direct action and taking part in civil disobedience, society starts looking at it in a different way because they think, why would someone risk their freedom, let's say, for this cause? And so they take it much more seriously and they look into it.
Gotcha. So what are the forms of these direct actions that you've taken, and how has that affected you personally in terms of how you felt doing street activism and interviews in the past versus how you feel doing direct action? Is there a difference there?
There's definitely a huge difference because there's a lot of adrenaline when it comes to direct action. Like if you're entering a farm in the middle of the night and there's always a chance of getting into trouble because of it, then obviously the adrenaline is very high. You are at risk of getting caught, getting into trouble, and things like that. I wouldn't say that it's more, I wouldn't say it's about how I'm feeling, like the difference. I would say the difference that it's having on the animals. For example, there's this one specific type of event of civil disobedience. It's called Meet the Victims, where activists enter a farm during the day, broad daylight. They enter a farm and they lock down inside. And when the farmer arrives, by the way, all types of activism I'm mentioning so far and that I will be mentioning and that I've taken part in and I encourage is non-violent, which means there is never any type of violence towards any human whatsoever, no matter who they are. So once the farmer comes during Meet the Victims event, there's a negotiator and we tell the farmer, all right, this is who we are, this is what we're doing. It's not against you personally, we just chose your farm because it was the easiest one to break in, let's say. Our demands are for the media to come and get footage and show it on the news, and also for us to be able to save a few animals and take them to an animal sanctuary with us. And from then on, it's all negotiations between the farmer and the police and the activists. So obviously you can imagine the adrenaline rush in that case is much higher.
100%. And has there ever been a time where you've done such a thing where things have gotten out of hand, or has it always been, super peaceful? Or has there been a time where maybe a farmer has, acted in maybe too emotionally, maybe even aggressively, or the police has, gotten aggressive, or has everything been super peaceful so far?
There has been some examples that I can't talk about.
Okay, that makes sense.
But I will give one example that involved the Meet the Victims event in the Netherlands. So it was around 180 activists, around 60 of us were on the outside team. So there's the outside team and the inside team. The outside team is there for support and to also, for the media when they arrive, before they go in, if they go in, they can actually also see why the outsiders are there. So I was on the outside team and there was around 120 people inside the farm. And because the Netherlands is a very small country, within a few hours, actually, we had helicopters surrounding us, the police coming from all sides. And word went out in the farming community. And before we know it, we were surrounded by thousands of farmers from all around the country, threatening with violence, throwing rocks. They flipped cars upside down, they slashed tires, they hit activists. And most of the time, the police was just staring. They wouldn't do anything.
Right.
They made a wall between us and them to stop it from becoming literally a massive fight between thousands of, we were less than 60 people outside, but the farmers were in the thousands, Yeah,
it'd be a little bit unfair.
Yeah, they did a minimum effort to protect us, but I did have a friend sending me videos of them getting attacked by farmers. And when I went to the police, she said, I can't do anything. And I was like, you are like, there was the hundreds of policemen. I was like, you are in the hundreds, you're here to enforce the law, but you're just using it against us. You're not using it against the people who are actually committing an act of violence against human beings as well. So I think that was the worst one. It started around, I think 9 a.m. And we left the site around 2 a.m. 80 activists were taken to jail that night. From inside the farm because the media wanted to go inside. The farmer said, I don't mind. But then the police didn't let the media go inside. And so the inside activists said, the inside team, they said, well, we're not going out until the media comes in, no matter what. So the police just brought huge buses and they just filled them all with the activists. They took them out and took them to jail straight away. But there was violence there. From our side, we didn't do any violence. We actually always showed peaceful signs, made sure that no one thinks we don't even care about, like, why would I even attack humans? I don't care. I'm there to raise awareness about the animals. So I guess that's the worst one.
And did the media end up covering any of this, or did they not?
The media was covering everything that was happening throughout the day on the outside. I even had non-vegan Dutch friends message me saying, like, are you also there? What's going on? And literally the whole country was shook. Everyone the whole day was like following the news to see what's going to happen at the end. So there was a lot of media coverage. They didn't let the media go in. However, at every Meet the Victims event, they use a hashtag, Meet the Victims. For example, in the case of the Netherlands, it was Meet the Victims NL for Netherlands. And the media started taking footage from there. And the footage was uploaded from activists who were inside the farms. So
Gotcha.
that's how the footage went out. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I really like the the what this, like when you're stressing the fact that you guys were, trying to be as non-violent as possible, because a lot of people will hear this and will think that this is automatically something that people are looking to get violent with, right? Because you're breaking in, you're occupying space and doing things that are against the law, so to speak. So a lot of people from the outside will think wrongly that this is that you're seeking out violence and conflict, right? But this is a really important message that you're saying, that it's all about respectfully just occupying space, standing your ground, and giving a good reason for doing so, right? Because if one person, even one person of the group, were to get violent and let's say hit a farmer or something, it'll defeat the whole purpose, and the media could use that against the vegan movement, right? So so that's really cool. So in terms of all the work that you've done so far, I've seen so many amazing interviews, a lot of footage from pig vigils, chickens, and also seeing that you've been traveling around the world in Europe, specifically to a lot of colleges, universities. I don't know if you do, high schools and that kind of stuff as well, but giving a lot of in-person speeches to students mostly. What has been the thing that has what have you learned from those experiences talking to these young people?
Yeah. Actually, university and school talks have been extremely successful because the people who are there, they're much younger, so they have less years of conditioning, so it's easier to communicate with them. They get less offended. They are more open to learn. They're not very shy to ask questions, and they always want to learn in general. So I've had really amazing experiences. I mean, last year I gave talks in 33 universities and schools in Switzerland, Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, and Portugal. And I always share an online survey afterwards that people can fill up anonymously, just so I can get feedback, because I don't want to waste anyone's time, and I want to make sure I'm getting the most out of these talks. And 65% of more than 2,500 people that I talked to actually said that after the talk they wanted to get active for the animals and the environment. And that there were different things in the survey that shows, like I think it was only 3 or 4% said it didn't change my view on anything. So that's nothing compared to all the others that said, I either want to completely go vegan right now, or I want to learn about veganism, or I want to start cutting down in the hopes of becoming vegan. So I realized that there is a massive amount of work that we have to do when it comes to education, because these people, these students, are the future generation. So if we can take care of the future generation, then once they are in control of everything, hopefully they'll make the right choices, because they are aware of what's happening to animals, and that you don't actually have to eat or exploit animals in any way to be alive and healthy. So I think one thing I've learned is that we should really never underestimate the power of education, and put a lot of work in educating and raising awareness with the future generation.
Yeah, that's so important, extremely important. And would you say that most people who show up to these speeches are vegan beforehand, and you're more talking about effective activism, or is it more, just the general students, like, random people who are maybe, they're still eating meat and not even thinking about veganism at all, like, or is there a good mix between the two?
So I've had two extremes. I've had talks where, let's say, half the class was vegan, but that usually happens in universities because it's organized independently, and people who show up probably see it on my Instagram or online on Facebook group or something, but they also still bring their friends. So there's always non-vegans. I've never had a case where, let's say, all the class was vegan. If I did, I would just do an activism workshop, but I've never had that. And I've also had the other case where I've had, let's say, 200 students and only one of them is vegan, and that's the one who asked the school if I can come and talk.
Yeah.
And usually the case where the majority are non-vegans, but when I say majority, I really mean 99% of the class are non-vegans,
Mm-hmm.
is the case of schools. Because in high schools, what they get is they can't really organize independently a lecture. So they go to the teacher or to the administration and they say, do you think it's possible to bring this guy? You know, he gives his talks. It's completely free, so it doesn't cost you anything. You know, all you have to do is give them the time. And they say yes. But then when they say yes, they make it a part of their school class. So for example, in Portugal, they made it a part of their English courses. So I spoke in many schools in Portugal, and you have anywhere from 25 to 200 students in one class, you know, I mean, or the whole, let's say, last 3 grades of the school. They are all in a big hall, and only one person from that huge amount of people is just vegan.
Yeah.
And not only is that really amazing because you realize the massive impact that these lectures have on people, but it also makes you realize how much difference one person can make, you know? I always say, like, people thank me after like a lecture, you know, thank you so much for coming and giving a lecture. And I'm like, no, go thank the person who helped organize this lecture, because even if I give lectures, I can't do any of them if no one helps organize one, you know? So the one example I can think about was a school in Portugal. It was 200 students and it was organized, well, the student who asked the teacher to organize was just a 15-year-old vegan. And it really made me feel so much gratitude towards people who do that effort to make sure these lectures take place.
Yeah, no, and it's so brave for these young kids to, you know, go to their teachers and to their, you know, school counselors or whoever to actually request this. It's really brave to try to, you know, organize something like this when they know it's not going to be the most popular thing, perhaps. So it's really, you know, amazing work, and it brings a lot of you know, warmth and, like, you know, a lot of gratitude, like you're saying, to my heart as well, to hear that, because a lot of people will think that, you know, there is no hope, you know, the system is against us, there is no one willing to hear our message. But here you are saying that, you know, these kids are able to convince their teachers and their school boards to open the floor up for someone like yourself who has so much to say about ethics and animal liberation. And that gives me a ton of hope for the future, because, you know, all we need is a platform to speak on. And I think in terms of in-person speeches, what I really like about that is that people can't just click next or like skip the video, you know, they're stuck there for the most part, unless they want to be the awkward person running out of the room. They're stuck there and they're kind of forced to hear you out and hear the message, which, you know, is all people need. People need some time and you know, some minutes and hours, you know, in their minds to analyze these things internally so that they can understand these things without having the chance to skip, basically. So that is why I think a lot of people forget the power of in-person speeches compared to social media, because a lot of people, myself included, I get into this mindset of, you know, videos, I can reach, you know, way more people, but at the same time, the quality of people you're reaching and the effectiveness of the in-person outreach and activism is way greater in terms of, you know, conversion rates or you know, interest peaking. So that's really good to hear, man.
Yeah, I mean, there has been studies done already comparing the effect that in-person lectures have compared to courses that are given online, and every single one of them say the same thing, that people remember better afterwards, people concentrate better in person, people connect better in person. So I had a few universities tell me, would you rather, instead of postponing it, do it online, you know, like this, you know, just we connect you to the internet and then you can give it to the school, to the students. And I said, I prefer just waiting, you know, because it's not going to have the same impact. You know, I don't want to waste my time and their time for a speech given online, and online isn't even like, for a speech about ethics, you know, you really need to connect and feel the presence of somebody, and the moment when they're talking about the importance of ethics or what's happening to animals, you really want to have their full attention. And that's not going to happen through a screen, that's for sure.
No, I 100% agree with that. And on the topic of reaching out to schools and arriving at schools to give these speeches, have there, been any awkward scenarios where, teachers are maybe, a little bit nervous of having you there,
Yeah,
or maybe a little bit
yeah,
uncomfortable?
yeah. So it happened last year. Um, I was around the end of my tour, so I was maybe the 30th lecture or something. I this university in Portugal. Well, I get to the bus station first, and the student comes to pick me up. It's university, so he says, "I have to tell you something. There's been a massive fight at the university administration." And I was like, "Why?" And he said, "Well, this university also teaches animal agriculture, so the teachers are fighting against each other. Half of them is saying he shouldn't be giving a talk about animal rights in this university. The other half is saying we don't want him to give a talk either, but it's his right." So no one wants me there. It's just that half of them think that I at least have the right, even though nobody wants me there. And at the end they said he can do it, but one of the other teachers apparently sent an email to all the students saying, go to his lecture and just like bash him in the Q&A, like don't be nice. Anyway, I get to this place, and I'm the kind of person that when there's an awkward situation like this, straight away I'm either laughing or smiling. I can't hold myself, 'cause there hasn't been any physical violent threats or anything.
Yeah.
So anyway, I give the talk, and there were a lot of people just like staring at me throughout the whole talk. They're really not friendly. And then at the end, one of the teachers started asking questions, and she quickly switched from questions to arguing against me.
Right.
And she started claiming that the numbers that I'm using are wrong, and things like that, and the statistics that I'm using, I'm wrong. And the thing is, it's really, I hate to say this, but it's really stupid of her to think that I'm using wrong numbers. If she thinks that I'm gonna walk into universities and give lectures and not make sure to use the right numbers, like who would do that, So if anything, the numbers and the statistics that I use either come from extremely official sources or from the animal agriculture industry itself.
Exactly.
So you can't argue. And so if let's say an article talks about something about veganism, but it comes from a vegan website, I check if the source is a non-vegan source. If it's not, I don't use that article, because that's not how we should work. We should listen to science, not vegans.
Yeah.
So anyway, we start arguing back and forth, and she starts giving all these ridiculous points, and I corner her so much that she ends up saying, we're not destroying the Amazon rainforest, that's a lie. And I just like stopped, and I didn't say anything, and I just smiled like, you really want to go there? And at that moment, a student who was not vegan, by the way, turned around in the middle of the hall in front of everyone, and she said, teacher, please, we're in a university, have some self-respect.
Wow.
And I was like, what? As in, like, she meant like, have respect, have some self-respect, use normal arguments, like arguing for the sake of being against him. She probably didn't say it in these words, by the way. She said it in Portuguese, but they told me afterwards that that's what's happening. But I immediately felt like, okay, this is getting tense now. And then it got really bad, and they started arguing back and forth, and I'm just standing there like, no. Anyway, Q&A ends, everything ends. The vegan students had prepared like a free food outside for everyone to just hang around a bit. And then this one student that I mentioned and her friend came up to me, and they said, we never thought we would go vegan, but when we realize how people argue against vegans, maybe today is the day for us to go vegan.
That's amazing. Wow.
So
That is a great story.
yeah, it was really intense. Like the arguments back and forth were really intense. But that's what happens. If you go down that road where you just try to use any argument against the vegan, it's just gonna make non-vegans look at you like, okay, no, I don't want to be on this side. I want to be on the factual side.
Right. No, 100%. And this is, everyone can just claim that numbers are wrong and dismiss facts and all these things, but when it comes down to the actual black and white ethical side of things, which you talk a lot about as well, how you know, it's impossible to argue against that, right? Because, you know,
Yeah,
it's just completely black and white. You know, there is a life form that, you know, wants to live. They don't want to die. They don't want to be eaten. And that is completely black and white. So that is something
yeah,
that a lot of people struggle to argue against. At least in my experience, there has never been anyone who's able to argue, you know, against that effectively, at least with, you know, reasonable
yeah, of course.
arguments. But it's
Yeah,
really cool that you make sure that your sources are legit, because again, we don't want anyone using you know, our points against us by saying that we're
of
just, you
course.
know, using propaganda and just
Yeah,
biased points of view. So that's really cool that you
yeah,
make sure that, you know, even using the sources from the animal agriculture industry themselves is
yeah,
just
the
amazing.
truth.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
And so, in terms of activism and social media and just veganism and the vegan community in general, there are a lot of different people from all walks of life doing all kinds of activism, all kinds of content on social media. And from your perspective, what are some of the things that, you know, us as vegans and people who want to be more active and, you know, spread this message, what are some things that we can do to avoid these pitfalls of inefficient, aggressive, and counterproductive activism? Because, you know, it's human nature to get emotional, it's human nature to get angry
yeah,
and to insult, so it's really hard sometimes to control ourselves. But what are some things that we can do to prevent us from going down this
yeah.
counterproductive road?
So I would say one important thing is that always keep in mind when you're commenting that there are people that are gonna read your comments. So maybe in a moment you get, you know, really heated up in a discussion and someone says something and you know, you can insult them or something, but that's not gonna help. You know, I mean, maybe at that moment it helps you because you feel better when you
Yeah,
insulted them. And I understand. I've been there, by the way. Like,
yeah,
obviously, I've
we
done
all
the
have.
same mistakes where you just like lose it on one person. But keep in mind that on the long term, when people come back to these comments and see what's the conversation about, you want them to end up on your side, on the animal side. And that could be a very good reminder of how to communicate with people. So I'll just give you a very simple example. 2 days ago, I made a post, and recently I've been doing something new where I use keto hashtags on my posts.
That's amazing.
By the way, it's next level. The amount of people that it reaches, but just I have from my last post alone, I think 73,000 accounts reached,
Wow.
and 83% were not following me.
Wow, that's a lot. I
Yeah,
might have
so
to
you
steal that
can, you know,
tactic.
yeah. No, I tell everyone use all the keto hashtags, use all the carnivore diet hashtags. You know, go on my profile, check what I'm using, copy it. I don't care, but be ready that you have an army of anti-vegans that are gonna comment on your post. So one of those people who was being very stubborn with me, she ended up by saying something like, "You just think that." You're on the right side of justice. I don't know what, but keep in mind that when I don't know, so, and that she mentioned karma in her discourse, and I was like, you have blood on your hands. You are in no place to speak about karma to me, you know. But the thing is, before I write it, I was so close to losing it because she was still mocking. She was mocking animals as well, and I was so close to losing it. And I sent a screenshot to my friend, and I was like, man, I just want to destroy her so bad, you know, like, you did not be nice to her. But then I thought, okay, am I going to feel good when I do that? Of course. But is that going to be effective? Of course not, you know. With her, I've already lost. I don't care about her. The reason why I continue the conversation, there's two reasons actually. One, it's because it keeps the engagement high on the post, which gives it more reach. Two is because people are going to read. And I just kept on trying to keep the conversation going as much as I can to make people realize how far she's going in her defending what she thinks is a personal
Mhm.
choice. So it's really important to take into consideration. There's a very perfect thing you can ask yourself in moments like this. It's an amazing question that I remind a lot of activists to use. Do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? You
That
know,
is
and
amazing.
you can be right sometimes. You know, you can be right in many things, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're being effective.
Mm-hmm.
And the animals don't care if you're right. The animals care if you're effective, because that's what helps them, you know? If an animal is going to slaughter and they had the capacity to think, they're not going to think, I know I'm going to die, but at least he was right, you know?
Yeah.
They're going to
100%.
think he's being effective, you know, or she's being effective, or this
Mm-hmm.
group or that group is being effective. That's what matters. So I know online activism is a bit of a harsh one when it comes to how much you can control your feelings, but try your best to remember you have to be effective.
That is such an amazing, tactic to use for sure. What helps me as well, or what used to help me a lot back in the day when, I was more heated and, I had the impulse to, write, those messages back was always just to, take a couple breaths and just, again, realize, what the bigger picture is and realize how human
Yeah,
beings behave and how emotional, we are as humans. And it's not always that person who's leaving a hateful message's fault. It's, society as a whole. It's the
yeah,
conditioning. It's the way the world operates. So we can't just point fingers and blame this person or blame that person for
yeah,
saying things the way that they're saying, because, usually 99% of the time it's a conditioning thing that we have to, work really hard to break down. And that will take
yeah,
a long time, and it takes patience, it takes persistence, and it takes, almost a meditative state and, self-control to be able to do things effectively, like you're saying. So that
I
is really
agree.
cool. So what are some of the effect, like the most effective tools that you've seen other activists or vegans use online to be able to open people's eyes to the message? What are some
Yeah.
effective ways you've been experimenting with yourself and you've seen other people doing an amazing job with?
Yeah. So two things that I think are very important is first, as I mentioned, using hashtags of non-vegans. You know,
Hmm.
it's good to have a few hashtags related to veganism, like just hashtag vegan or hashtag vegan activism or things like that. But try to incorporate as much as you can non-vegan hashtags. That goes from keto, just keto diet, carnivore transformation, all these words. They have millions of hashtags like this that you can use that's going to bring a lot of attention to your post from non-vegans, which is who you're trying to change, you know?
Yeah.
It's nice to get like 2,000 likes on a post about veganism, but it's useless if it's liked 2,000 times by other vegans.
100%.
You know, our point is not to be, you know, we don't want to get a pat on the back by other vegans. We would just want to reach non-vegans. So
Exactly.
use non-vegan hashtags. Another thing that I realized actually around a year and a half ago is the importance of always being in touch and being in contact and collaborating or just being open with vegans who are, let's say, more of influencers, you know, one who could say like plant-based chefs or plant-based influencers or things like that, not necessarily people who do activism the way you do activism. And the reason why I say this is because I walked into a slaughterhouse around a year and a half ago in Indonesia, and I filmed the slaughter of 3 cows. The day after, at the time, I had around 27,000 followers. I knew it was going to be shared a lot. I knew it. It was horrible footage. It was something that not a lot of people can see or film or get access to. But what happened is that an influencer, like a plant-based person, let's say, who had millions of followers, shared it on her page, on her
Mm.
story. She just said, "Go watch Seb Alex's story," and she had 3 million followers at the time. Well, I say plant-based influencer, but she's obviously an activist, you know.
Right.
But that's how people look at them. That's why I'm using these
Yeah,
words.
yeah, yeah.
So because she's not an activist the way I am an activist, the majority of her following are non-vegans, you know, or non-active vegans.
Hmm.
So as a result, it went from her to another influencer, to another influencer, to another influencer. And within 48 hours, I had to upload it twice because it went so viral. My phone was crashing because of the notification, imagine. It was seen, I think it was 50,000 times just on my
Wow.
story. And at the time, I used to get maybe 3,000 views per story. And then I had 50,000 people watching my stories. And I linked Challenge 22 to my stories as well with the swipe up option for people to swipe up, which is a website that helps people go vegan. So Challenge 22 gave me the link so that they can track and see how many people are signing up. And within 3 weeks, they sent me a message and they said, listen, we don't know what you've done, but more than 1,700 people signed up to go vegan just from your link.
Wow.
And at that moment, I realized how much as vegan activists, we only share each other's posts, we only communicate with each other, but we've created a bubble. You know, our content isn't leaving the bubble. And what happened showed me the results of animal rights related content going out of the bubble of animal rights activists. So from that day on, I realized the importance of collaborating with vegan activists that are not doing the same type of activism that we're doing. You know, for example, there was the chef in Canada. Her name is Erin Ireland. Amazing woman. I didn't know about her. She didn't know about me. She shared it at the time. She had, I think, 150,000 followers. However, the majority of her followers, they sent me messages like just saying like, oh, I'm only watching this because Erin said we should watch it. I don't know what. I kept on sending her screenshots of what her followers were writing to me because they love her so much that they watched my stories and they went vegan. And I kept on thanking her like, thanks so much for sharing this. You know, look what you've done just by sharing it. And so, you know, there's this kind of attitude in the animal rights activism scene where, you know, we call vegans who are, let's say, lifestyle vegans, we call them, oh, they're not vegan, they're plant-based, you know,
Yeah.
just because they don't do the type of activism that we do. But in fact, when it comes to numbers, they are reaching more people than animal rights activists, you know, because, and I consider you someone like that as well, you know, because you use the health slash sports approach, you know, like taking care of your body, working out, you know, doing the sports and everything. And anyone can be interested in that. And the majority of people who are doing that are non-vegans because majority of the world are non-vegans.
Yeah.
And your impact, obviously, if you have how many followers do you have on Instagram now?
Like 230,000 or something like that. Yeah.
Exactly. If you have 230,000 followers and an animal rights activist that does my type of activism, let's say, has 230,000 followers, you will still have much more impact than that person because that person's followers are going to be similar people to them. Whereas your followers are going to be coming to you from another background, from another message, but they're going to land on the ethical message as well. And that's so important, I think.
Yeah, no, and I have you know, many personal stories, you know, relating to that. So, you know, when I started off, when I went vegan, I was super passionate about it, and I had social media before that, right? So my audience went through that transition with me, and many switched over to the same lifestyle with me, right? And you know, the more passionate you become about veganism, the more you want to talk about it. But the other side is, the more you talk about it, the more vegans you attract rather than non-vegans, right? Because, you know, a lot of times only people that can relate are vegans. Of course, some people that are open-minded will be able to listen and, you know, turn vegan for sure. There's definitely a percentage of people that will react well to those, you know, things. So it's extremely important. But I found that at a certain point, my social media was, you know, only vegans, right? You know, like 90% vegan. And I was, you know, as good as I felt about myself, you know, oh, I'm this, you know, this guy who's, you know, helped the community, and, you know, I'm, you know, really proud vegan. I always ask myself, you know, how can I be even more effective? And like you're saying, a lot of times it is, you know, maybe tuning, like, you know, distancing yourself a little bit, even though it hurts, because as a vegan, you want to talk about it nonstop all the time, which is kind of why I have this podcast, because I want to talk about veganism as well. So, you know, I realized for myself that, you know, making topic videos on veganism nonstop were alienating a lot of people, but keeping my, you know, my core fan base extremely happy, and we had a great relationship. But it wasn't the impact that I wanted to have in terms of converting or introducing people to this lifestyle in a way that was effective, right? So I can completely relate to that. And what you're saying about, other people considering, these plant-based influencers not to be, as vegan as they are, that's just, ego and, this
Yeah,
self-righteousness that
yeah,
is really easy to get into, because we're all humans, and we all want to feel important, like we're doing something, maybe, morally superior or something. We can all fall in these pitfalls, but it's important to realize that everyone has a role to play, and it's not about
yeah,
being superior or being better than anyone else. It's just about getting together and using our forces and different approaches to have the biggest impact possible. So I really like that
yeah.
message.
I agree.
Yeah. So in terms of, your personal journey right now, how are you viewing the world and the future, today in 2020 compared to, in 2014 when you first went vegan? Has there been, incidents where you've lost
Yeah,
hope, or have you, gotten, more hope out of the whole transition? Or
yeah.
I'm sure there are ups and downs, like, every vegan has, difficult days and months and years. But how has that perspective changed throughout the years?
So it's interesting because it's really, as you said, it's ups and downs. Usually it's ups when I'm giving the lectures, because I connect with them, I talk to them, and then I listen to their questions and we communicate back and forth. The lectures that I give are open for everyone. And also when I finish, I tell everyone, please feel free to raise your hand and argue against me. This is a safe space. And even the few cases where I've had people argue against, even they were still being very open to my message. And that really gives me a lot of hope. And then, when I'm doing the online surveys, usually when I do the talks, it's a really hectic schedule. So last year it was 49 events in 45 days, or 45 events in 49 days, something like that. It was just nonstop, lecture, and then maybe going to a vigil, and then street activism, and then activism workshop for the activists. So what would keep me going is reading the surveys, because I would just read one survey and I'm like, all right, let's go to the next talk. Because sometimes I have like 3 talks in one day, and then the next day I have 2 talks, and then the day after again 3 talks. So when I'm on the road and doing these lectures, I'm on an up. As much as physically I'm exhausted,
Right.
because I'm nonstop traveling, and lectures, they're fun, but they're also really tiring, because you're just not stopping from talking non-stop. Just talk, especially if it's more than one lecture in one day. So it really gives me a lot of hope when I'm in that surrounding. When I'm on a down, it's usually because of social media. When I see
Yeah.
the dark side of humanity, the internet.
Yeah.
When the comments that really make you, you can get 50 comments that are positive, get that one negative comment, and you're like, we're so screwed, humanity is so messed up, and things like that. So it's always ups and downs, but I think right now we are approaching a time in history where the situation we are in is gonna very probably and hopefully lead us into a more vegan world. The reason why I say that is because the latest science right now, the latest researchers, are all showing that the best theory of where the coronavirus came from is actually pigs, not wild animals that people are eating. So basically what they did, they tested all the animals at the Wuhan wet market that they mentioned the virus started in. All the animals there were tested negative. None of them had the coronavirus. The first person who was infected had nothing to do with the market. 1/3 of the people within the first 2 months had no ties to the market. The reason why they suspect that it's the market is because they think, all right, we have animals here and we have domesticated animals and we are eating them. And, coronavirus comes from bats as well. So they're thinking it's because of that. But it's not directly from bats. There was a host animal, an intermediate animal between the main animal and the human. And that animal has to be an animal that is very highly and densely populated, and an animal whose immune system is similar to humans. And the perfect animal that fits these 2 criteria is the pig. Specifically because that state where Wuhan is has a lot of pig farms. I'm talking hundreds of thousands of pigs, if not millions, in one state. So this is gonna make us really start thinking, all right, should we maybe start considering changing our food system, you know?
Mhm.
Another thing that I think could also lead us into that direction is a new virus that is coming up now. I think it's called H1N5, and it comes from chicken farming. And don't take my word on this. Do research if you're listening to this. I'm not very sure, but I think the mortality rate 50%.
Wow,
So we're
that's crazy.
talking about a new pandemic that's probably gonna start with a mortality rate of 50%.
Hmm.
So I have this weird hope in me that when that happens on top of this, people start thinking, all right, what the hell are we doing now?
Yeah,
That I do wish we don't have to get to that point to realize the
of course.
importance of switching to plant-based system. I do wish people change because of the ethical impacts and the suffering that it causes onto animals. But you know, whatever works. And if this is gonna be what's gonna lead us into a plant-based food system, so let it be.
Hmm.
So it upsets me that, you know, we are where we are right now, but it also makes me think, well, maybe this is what we need to start changing.
Yeah, no, I can 100% you know, see that as, you know, when you look into psychology and stuff, like, you know, when things get serious, when your family starts dying and these things, of course, it's going to hit you
Yeah,
way harder than watching, you know, an animal rights activist talk about the ethical issues with eating, you know, pork, right? So
yeah,
whatever, you know, gets people there, you know, of course, I'm not going to say, you know, we're not supporting, you know, the virus is killing
yeah,
everyone, of course, but we're saying that maybe this is what it takes for people to wake up and ask these tough questions, right? So yeah, 100%. I do also have a lot of optimism, and I do believe that in our lifetime we will make a lot of progress if we just keep going and you know, fight a good fight, and just, you know, focusing on educating people from a, you know, socially, you know, a psychologically smart way, and just, you know, pushing people in the right direction. I there is no doubt in my mind that we're going to get
yeah,
closer and closer, year after year. I mean, even, you know, I started this lifestyle 5 years ago, and you know, the progress that we made in the last 5 years is just insane. I didn't even know what vegan was 5 years ago, or, you know, like 7 8 years ago. So the progress has been immense, but I don't think, you know, a lot of people in the anti-vegan community thinks that, you know, it's all going downhill and we've had our, you know, moment of glory, but we haven't even started,
yeah.
because the truth will win at the end. And, you know, we have the truth on our side, and it's, you know, it is that black and white, right? So I am really, really optimistic, and you know, people like yourself, who are, you know, on the front lines doing the tough work, you know, the heartbreaking, you know, psychologically breaking work of actually witnessing these animals being, you know, tortured. It's extremely difficult, and I admire people like you for, you know, doing that, and you know, even though it might not be the best for your mental health, it's really important for people to, you know, be able to see the truth. So I just applaud you and admire you a lot for doing that for us.
Thank you.
Anyways, Seb, for people who are not familiar, or, you know, have not followed you on social media yet, what is the best way to get in touch with you and connect with you? Are
All
you
right.
on Twitter, social media? What's your
Yeah.
handles?
So Instagram is seb.alex. YouTube is Seb Alex, and then you can get more information on what I do and my schedule on my website sebalex.org.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to chatting in a couple months, or, you know, wherever else that happens.
Yeah,
So yeah, thank
hopefully.
you, man, and we'll see you
Thanks for
soon.
having me.
All right, thank you. Bye
Thank
bye.
you.